In this, the third week since Israel launched its invasion of Hamas-held territory in Gaza, in response to the brutal sadistic massacre that occurred 4 weeks ago in Israeli settlements, moral clarity has already become blurred. There will be people marching today here in Washington who do not understand for what it is that they march and for what it is that they are against. Many of us find ourselves wondering in amazement and bewilderment how anyone cannot distinguish between a terrorist organization bent on destroying Israel, killing every Jew and Israeli, an organization supported by Iran, which ultimately seeks not just the death of Israelis and of Jews, but also of Christians and any non-Muslims, which has zero tolerance for gays, women's rights, free expression, freedom of the press, any of the values cherished by Western society, and against a modern democratic society, which sends aid around the world whenever and wherever disaster strikes, which has given the world so much, whose citizens are refugees from persecution throughout the millennia, who has received more Nobel Prizes per capita than Germany, the United States, or France, and whose people just want to live in peace. How is it that people cannot make that distinction between the two? In the month since the terrible, terrible attack which occurred on what has come to known in Israel as Black Shabbat, we've already gone through several phases. First, there was the utter horror, shock, disbelief, and revulsion over what happened. Second, as Israel planned its response, there was anxiety and concern about what would happen, coupled with sympathy for what Israel experienced. And now that Israel has launched its response, as predicted and expected, the initial sympathy has eroded. It's been replaced by an explosion of vicious anti-Semitic venom coming from so many different corners. While Israel wages a war for its very survival, Natan Sharansky has written, quote, "Instead of unanimous condemnation, what we've heard from college campuses is the full justification of the pogrom, the worst in modern memory, in statements by campus organizations and in demonstrations celebrating Hamas and what it did. According to the worldview that guides these deplorable responses, voiced repeatedly by students and their professors, Israel must be blamed for everything because their fighting against the Zionist oppressor is how the worldwide struggle against colonialism is viewed and begins." End quote. Indeed, the misguided, naive, manipulated opponents of Israel are ignorant of basic facts. What they do not realize is that Hamas's war is a war not just against Israel, but against the Jews. It's against a war against all Jews, without distinction to our level of observance or practice, affiliation or not. But Israel's fighting not just for itself, and not just on behalf of Jews, and not just a war against Jews, nor does it fight just to eradicate the terror organization bent on its destruction. Israel is actually fighting for much more than that. It's fighting a war which it neither initiated nor sought. Israel's President Isaac Herzog put it very clearly in yesterday's New York Times op-ed piece when he said, quote, "This is not a battle between Jews and Muslims. It's not a battle just between Israel and Hamas. It's between those who adhere to norms of humanity and those who are practicing a barbarism that has no place in the modern world. The phase we're currently in, the Hamas terrorists who attacked Israeli homes and families, who had no qualms about burning babies. They tortured children, raped women, destroyed peace-loving communities. They were so proud of their deeds that they made sure to capture them on video and even broadcast what they were doing live. These videos will forever remain a stain on those Palestinians and on their supporters who celebrate that day, and a testament to the depravity of the terrorists and the ideas that inspired them. History has taught us that foul ideologies often find the Jewish people first, but they tend not to stop there. We find ourselves on front lines of this battle, but all nations face this threat, and they must understand that they could be next, end quote. So often in history, Jews are but the first, like the canary in the proverbial mine, who alert us to the depravity and to all that is wrong with the society, because next it turns on everyone else. Indeed, Israel is fighting for the values of all of Western society. The people who are marching today do so thinking they're marching on behalf of the oppressed, on behalf of victims of colonizers. In reality, they're useful idiots, a term I've not used before. Because they do not realize that they are the very first whose rights would be trampled on were Hamas to be victorious. It makes no sense that feminists and gays would be in favor and marching with them. They wouldn't last more than 2 minutes in a Hamas-run regime of Gaza. If the left really cared about morality, those who are marching, they would speak up and express compassion for the hostages who are being held against their will. Instead, what do? They tear down the signs with the pictures of the captives, trying to even deny the victims the dignity of being remembered. Yesterday, I saw something that just amazed me. Some of you have seen about the signs that have gone up, right? And the people tearing down the signs. And there was a woman who was taped, and she was complaining because somebody had put a razor blade on the sign. So when you took it down, her hand was bleeding. She said, "Look at this, my hand is bleeding." Who are the ones who are the really terrible people? As she was tearing down these signs of the kidnapped victims, and she was complaining because her hand was bleeding. So if those who call for a ceasefire really cared about the loss of innocent lives, if they really cared about Arab lives, they would have been in the streets protesting and calling attention to the 500,000 to 600,000 Arabs killed in Syria's civil war. They would have called attention to the thousands of Palestinians killed by Bashar Assad's troops. They would have called attention to the thousands of Palestinians who were sent into exile and evicted from Syria and from elsewhere. As Michael Oren has pointed out, the only time that the left cares about the loss of Arab or Palestinian lives, and that anyone cares about the loss of Palestinian or Arab lives, is when it comes at the hands of Israel defending itself. There's such hypocrisy, such hypocrisy. As we see the scenes of the results of Israel's campaign in Gaza, kind of campaign that we did not see when the United States invaded Mosul. We did not see during the war in Afghanistan or Iraq against ISIS or against Al-Qaeda or against the Taliban. But now we're treated to those scenes every single day. So let us not forget that Hamas is a wholly owned subsidiary of Iran. That Iran, through Hamas, chose when to attack. Hamas chose where to attack. It is Hamas that chose to embed its operations in civilian areas. It is Hamas that chose to bed its center of operations underneath of hospitals and in schools that are run by the United Nations. It is Hamas that has chosen to use the billions of dollars, $50 billion in the last 10 years alone, it received in foreign aid to build tunnels, to funnel the money into the bank accounts of its leaders, who are some of the richest terrorists in the world. Hamas chose to build its command center under tunnels, and to build tunnels instead of places of business, instead of helping its people. It's Hamas that has chosen to block its citizens from leaving the Gaza Strip, and on and on. By the way, one should be a little skeptical about the information coming out of Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. I don't know if any of you have seen some of the videos. I've seen videos of the corpses that were lined up in the body bags in Gaza that suddenly mysteriously begin to move, probably because they weren't really dead. They were just there for the cameras. Now, that's not to say that there hasn't been innocent individuals who were killed and who are suffering. It's not to say that those children who have been killed are unfortunate victims of what Hamas has done. But let us always remember, Hamas is wholly responsible for what is happening. They're fully responsible for the lives that are being lost because of the choices that they have made, the celebrations they have, and the candy that's passed out when Jewish children are murdered. And so Gaza you must remember, is not occupied. There's not a single Jewish settlement in the Gaza Strip since 2005. And what a beautiful area that was and could have been. It could have been Singapore, it could have been Hong Kong, but instead it became a death trap to a regime bent on killing others. And so let us keep in mind that the only Israelis in Gaza since 2005 are those who were kidnapped, those who are being held captive against their will. We read in today's Torah portion about the angels who come to warn of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. We read about the angels who try and save the city from itself. But the people there refuse to listen, refuse to heed the warnings, and so it is destroyed. I'll conclude with my favorite midrash about this particular parasha, which I've shared before. The midrash is of a man who's going up and down the streets of Sodom, speaking out against all of the evil, the depravity of the city, because it has become so corrupt and such a lawless place. And someone comes up to him and notices he's been doing this for so long. They say to him, "Oh man, don't you realize you are never going to be able to change these people?" And he says, "I am aware of that. Long ago, I gave up any hope of the possibility of changing them. Now I speak out just to be sure they do not change me." And so let us be that voice of conscience, that voice reminding the world, that lonely voice of what's the difference between good and evil. What's the difference between the people who are attacked and the people who are defending themselves? What's the difference between those who burn babies and those who do whatever they can to try and avoid civilian casualties? That's the voice of reason, and that's the voice we must raise, and that's the voice that must never be silent. That the Jewish people, the land of Israel, the people of Israel must continue so that we will be able to fulfill the ancient prophecy, to be able to be an Or Lagoyim, a light unto the nations. And that is what they try to extinguish. Let us not be sure it is never extinguished. And let us say, Amen.